Why hello again, my name's D. Campbell and welcome to another one of my videos. I am a coding educator. In today's video we're going to be talking about procedural only and global billing guidelines at FQHCs and RHCs. This is a very complicated guideline, but I just personally love teaching the gospel of medical coding, and I like going through some of the harder ones. If you don't work at an FQHC or RHC, I honestly wouldn't recommend this video for you because there's quite a few nuances that are specific to them once it comes to PPS payment. But if you work for one of those clinics, strap in. Hope you learn a lot from this video. The main guideline to be aware of when it comes to this is Guideline 40.4 Global Billing Guidelines. You can find this in Chapter 9 of the CMS Handbook, and we'll break down each of these main paragraphs here for what's important about this. This first guidelines here for the paragraph is about surgical procedures furnished in your FQHC by your providers. The key note that it states here is procedures are included in the payment of otherwise qualified visits and are not separately payable. If the procedure is associated with a qualifying visit, then the charges for the procedure go on the claim with that visit. So basically what that means is at an FQHC or RHC where you're getting paid PPS rates is you must always report a qualifying visit code to trigger your PPS rate. If you don't report those codes, obviously you will not get that payment for it. So just make certain you're always reporting an E&M code whenever you're doing a procedure in-house to a PPS payer. But let's look at the guidelines for a service furnished at a location other than your RHC or FQHC. They still are subject to Medicare billing guidelines requirements. So basically, if it's a major surgery happening somewhere else and then they're following post-operative care at an FQHC or RHC, you still have to be aware of the surgical procedure guidelines that happen there. If an RHC or FQHC furnished services to a patient who has had their surgery elsewhere and are still in the global billing period, it is the FQHC's responsibility to determine if these services have been included in the global surgical billing. What that means is it is up to you to review the documentation and how they billed for their services. And if they properly billed with a modifier 54 for just surgical procedure only. If they didn't, then you as the FQHC can't actually bill for these services separately if they are in a global period. If you're not aware of global periods, they're broken down into 7-day windows for your more basic minor procedures, 10-day procedures, or 90-day globals for your more major procedures. Most FQHCs themselves aren't completing the major procedures, but you might be doing the follow-up care for a major procedure, and it's important to be aware of these guidelines and how they'll work. For FQHCs, as you may or may not know, there's this qualifying visit list. Now, this qualifying visit list hasn't been updated since 2017 now, so please message CMS regularly to let them know that they need to update this list. Quite frankly, as a coder, I think it's very, very wrong to not update a list for 9 years. Imagine me as a coder who's not updating my guidelines for the last 9 years. Obviously, I'm going to be reporting a lot of things wrong. I'll still be on the 1998 medical decision-making guidelines, for example, instead of the 2021 guidelines that we're all using. And quite frankly, so many other things I'd be reporting wrong. So please, please, please message your CMS as regularly as often as possible so that way they can update this list. But as you can see, they have these G codes here that make your PPS rate trigger, and these are attached to the E&M codes. As you can see, it's a very dated document, so that's why there's level 1 code still on it. There's a lot of dead codes on it that no longer exist or that got combined into things. So really, this needs to be updated, quite frankly. So yeah. Let's break down how it will work, though, when you have these services on an actual level of things. So let's say the surgery is performed outside of your clinic and now you're doing the follow-up care for a patient who is outside, or they do have a global for a major surgery. We'll have it broken down by Medicare or a PPS payer versus commercial. For Medicare, we will report each service with an E&M code based off the guidelines as long as we're eligible for those services and the previous clinic did properly report it. You will report it with a Z aftercare code if applicable, or if it's an injury, fracture, anything like that, you will have to use an injury S or T code. I do have a video on aftercare, so if you're not aware of that, please watch that video. You must report with modifier 55 post-operative care only. Now, this is kind of a weird one where you don't necessarily have to report it with the modifier 55 because this guideline here states that Medicare global billing requirements do not apply to RHCs and FQHCs. So technically you can get away with not using it. Personally, I don't use it every time, but it's up to you if you want to use it. For commercial, no E&M code will be used. Instead, you must report the same surgery code with modifier 55 to indicate that you are doing the post-operative care only for that major surgery. And then you will report with the proper Z code or S code the same. Now note, if the original payer improperly billed without a modifier 54, expect denials. It's not your fault that the other person didn't bill properly, but if they didn't bill properly, then you're just going to get denials, and be aware of that. So it is important to be aware of how the people that you're getting your referrals from bill for their services. So now let's break it down for surgeries performed inside your clinic. So we have this broken down by Medicare and commercial once again. For pre-op visits, for both of them, you will bill with just an E&M code. If you're not aware of how to do pre-op visits, please watch my video on pre-ops. That breaks down how to do medical decision-making and billing on time in pre-op visits. For Medicare, you will submit an E&M code with your surgery code because the E&M code is the one that will trigger your PPS rate. Without the E&M code, you will not get your rate to trigger. For a commercial payer, you will report the surgery code only with modifier 54. For post-operative care, for Medicare, you will report with the 99024 or the global period code because you got paid your PPS rate on this visit and on this visit. So to ask for it again would be considered double billing, and you cannot do that. So you will not get paid for this third visit with Medicare. Well, for commercial, you will bill the surgery code again with modifier 55 indicating post-operative care only. And finally, I got a couple examples here at the bottom to break down how it works. I have this table here for the pre-op visits, and then I have the visit notes as well for it. So let's look at the pre-op visits for Medicare versus commercial. An established patient comes in and is concerned about a mass on their back. After discussing with the patient, it is best to follow up with the incision and drainage is decided. You will bill that visit as the E&M code that's appropriate for both the commercial payers and the PPS payers. The operative visit, patient presents for an IND of a mass on their back. 1 centimeter incision was made and manual expression happened. You will bill for Medicare or a PPS rate, the 99213 with modifier 25, and then the incision and drainage code. Commercial, you will only bill the incision and drainage code with surgical care only modifier attached to that service. Now for this 25 modifier on the E&M, I know ArtsPro says you don't necessarily have to do it because there is this guideline here that states we are not required to follow those guidelines. But personally, I always like to put the 25 modifier on it because it still feels like you do get denied on it because insurance just thinks it's weird when you report an E&M code with the procedure code. That's just my personal opinion on it. I do still use the 25. And then for post-operative visit, the patient presents for packing. Sorry, there's a typo there. 6 days later. For Medicare PPS rate, we're going to report only the global service code because you already got paid your rate 2 times here. Well, for a commercial payer, we will report the incision and drainage again with post-operative code only. So finally, what about procedures without globals? How would we report those for FQHCs? So simple procedures like IUD insertion, simple laceration repair, or Nexplanon removals, all of those would fall under the 0-day global period. So how you'll have to bill for them at a FQHC for a PPS payer and a fee-for-service payer is quite different. You will always have to attach the E&M code every single time when you're dealing with a PPS payer. Because remember, the E&M code is what triggers these G codes for us getting the PPS payment. The actual procedure itself will not get paid by the PPS service. Instead, it'll be total to your weighted score at the end of the year and thus affecting your future PPS rates. For fee-for-service, you will report the actual procedure itself and only the procedure itself. And then you can report an E&M code as long as you're following the 25 guidelines properly. But just simply for this example, we're going to say it was purely procedure-only service. So finally, for an FQHC, you have to think about how would I handle a self-pay patient. Usually you handle self-pay patient by CMS guidelines. However, the CMS guidelines do make it more expensive for the patient because you kind of have to arbitrarily attach on E&M codes with the procedure code. So personally, I will always bill self-pays on the commercial version of it because the guidelines are quite clear that you should pick the cheaper value option when it comes to self-pay. Doing this Medicare or PPS version of just tacking on extra E&M codes just seems wrong for the patient. So my name's D. Campbell. That's how you report procedure-only visits at a FQHC center. Just remember, if you're dealing with a PPS payer, you must always have an E&M code. If you're dealing with a commercial payer, you are better off following global guidelines because they will follow global guidelines. My name's D. Campbell. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.